I must admit, I didn't know a whole lot about this war of mine going into it, but I did know two things: that it was one of the most critically acclaimed indie games of 2014, and it's from the same studio that brought us the recent Moonlighter. How did it stack up against those lofty expectations? I'm Jordan from SwitchWatch, and this is This War of Mine. If you're new here, don't forget to do yourself a favour and click that subscribe button. The story for This War of Mine is a tough one to swallow. Set in a near-modern society in a fictional Eastern European country, war has taken over a city, and the citizens are left to defend for themselves. With no end in sight, you take control of a small handful of survivors who are held up in a large but derelict house, and you must survive until the ceasefire. There are two modes in this release. There's a classic mode and a dedicated story mode. The classic mode doesn't have an overarching story, even though the survivors all have their backgrounds as well as potential endings. I like this as it feels more like a choose your own adventure kind of vibe, also using your own bits of imagination to fill in the gaps of these survivors, as well as basically deciding their fates as to which of the many endings they will receive. The story mode is more dedicated and focused on the storytelling aspect of specific characters. The first scenario involves a father and his sick daughter as he tries to help them both survive by whatever means. I will be honest, it's an interesting concept and probably a welcome one for some, but I didn't find myself enjoying this one as much as the other mode. It felt slower and more restricted early on, and so I didn't feel like I wanted to see the story out. Instead, I went back to the classic mode where the looser story works better, I feel. This War of Mine is a war-themed survival game from a side-on view. As you may have guessed from the story, it's pretty grim and depressing as you control a group of civilians doing their best to get by. When you initially boot up the game in classic mode, I believe you'll always get the same 3 individuals. But as you progress more or start again, you'll have a randomly selected groups from the 12 survivors overall. Each character has their own specific personalities and bonus stats. For example, Bruno is a good cook and will use less resources, while Roman is ex-military, I believe, and will be a sturdy guard against frequent raids on your house. Some are more easily affected by the atrocities that you may do or witness. If a colleague dies, some will be more depressed than others. If you steal resources from innocent people, some survivors will be ridden with guilt, while others just don't care. So there's lots of variety here. The gameplay loop revolves around a day and night cycle, which offers 2 stark experiences. During the day, you can't exit from your hideout due to enemy snipers ready to take you down. This is where you need to spend your time tending to the needs of the base and your fellow survivors. You can switch between however many survivors you have with the shoulder buttons and let them do different tasks. When you first start the game, your hideout is full of rubble and locked doors that you need to be taken care of. But once free, you can use the space to build essential things for survival. Beds are needed for a good night's sleep, a stove for cooking, a heater, plus a myriad of other things once you've upgraded enough. All of these things don't come easily though, as they require resources such as wood and bits and bobs, which I'll get to in a second. You have to take care of your survivors' needs such as their hunger, sleep, and health levels. It's a balancing act, and to be honest, if you have around 3 survivors still, this section isn't the most difficult to keep track of. I think it's fairly easy to balance things out. The problem is making the most of what you have. Due to the survival nature of the game, you can only do so much thanks to the scarcity of resources available. The nighttime is where your party's chance of survival is pretty much decided. You have to dictate which person does what during this time. I usually found it best to let one person sleep, let one stay guard to watch off raids, and send one out to the various locations to scavenge vital resources through whatever means. There are loads of locations that open up over time, each providing a different scenario and potential spoils. The supermarket will obviously have more food supplies than it will gun parts, for example. The military base will have more juicy, useful items, but will be intensely guarded. There are also houses that you can visit with people who will do you no harm. Maybe just some old people trying to wait out the war, some homeless people taking refuge in an abandoned school. They will do no harm to you, but you can steal their food if you're desperate enough. Believe me, I was desperate enough. After my star scavenger was shot dead and my remaining 2 survivors were sick, tired, and hungry, I lost all my equipment and things were stolen. I did the unthinkable. I stole from some harmless, homeless people. The guilt racked my character and myself personally. It went against everything I stood for, and when I first started playing, I vowed I would never do such a thing. But this game is very powerful in its morals, and how easily it can corrupt them. Having only spent a few days with this War of Mine, I still feel kind of like there's a lot to discover and so many more ways to experience what it has to offer. That's why I appear to be talking a little bit more vague than normal, but there is a surprising amount of content here than what you may think. The different decisions really do feel like they have weighty impact on the game. The different characters, paths, and endings, I do feel a little overwhelmed at the potential. This is the kind of game that I have to stick a good 30 to 40 hours into just to really get to grips with its quirks and nuances. It's a game designed to be played over and over again with different characters, with different scenario variations, and finding all the subtleties that the game has to offer. No doubt every run through this game will be a different one. Named the Complete Edition, I'm led to believe that this release has all of the content previously released elsewhere, but I'm not entirely sure since information is a little vague and its previous releases elsewhere have brought different amounts of content with it. So, as stated before though, it is pleasingly overwhelming no matter what in regards to content. I think my favorite aspect was being able to customize my own game and character. You can make it as easy or as difficult as you want, and I think this will bring a lot of replayability in itself. You can choose which survivors you want in the house, how long and harsh the winter is, when the ceasefire will come, as well as the intensity of the war. Creating your own custom character is really good too. I actually felt more attached to my custom character than I did to the ones that were already in the game. Visually, the game is full on grim, and that's a good point in many respects. With the pencil shading all over the place, it really looks very unique, and it truly works for the atmosphere and mood it's trying to convey. It's miserable though. This is not the kind of game that will coerce a smile out of you during gameplay. It's just like watching a war documentary when you're intrigued and yet appalled at the same time. You enjoy it, but you can't say it was nice, if that makes any sense at all. I think if you took the filter off the game, it would look pretty basic, so it does cover up that aspect pretty well too. The audio is done very well. It takes a backseat and never tries to show off too much, but again, it's all part of adding to the atmosphere of the game. It's very brooding, haunting, and at times terrifying in the showing you of impending danger. It's almost like it goes musically well with the sound of the bombs exploding in the far distance. I think I would have liked some voice acting in this game. I know it's an indie title, but for me, I think voices for the main characters could have gone a long way to feeling more attached to them, as well as their personal well-being. If you could hear their personal deterioration as time goes on, that would have been incredibly effective in my opinion. For value, this War of Mine comes in a whopping $39.99 on the US eShop. That's honestly surprising. I'm not instantly dismissing it, but it's certainly much higher priced than your average indie game these days. As stated, it does include all of the DLC, I think, and potential future updates too. And there is a lot of content for you, but I'm not fully convinced it's worth that price. It's a lot of content, but it's a lot of similar kinds of content. Plus, it's an older game available cheaper elsewhere. The PlayStation Network, for example, currently has it at $20 cheaper, although I do believe that's with a bit less content. Still, a little bit of perspective for an older game would have been nice. I think even just $10 cheaper would have been an easier pill to swallow. Overall, there's no doubt that this War of Mine is a fantastic survival game, and no doubt one that many games that followed looked up to immensely for its atmosphere, gameplay loop, and story impact. It still plays very well to this day, although the large price tag is a barrier for me. Would I be happy paying that much? I don't think so. There's a lot of content though, and you could easily deposit 100 hours or so if you enjoyed what the game has to offer. From a personal perspective, it was a bit too grim of a subject matter for me to say that I loved playing it, and I think those looking for a happy-go-lucky escapism may want to look elsewhere, but those looking for a hard-hitting, well-put-together experience, then this War of Mine is great. An 8 out of 10. Thank you ever so much for watching. For my game suggestion today, check out my review of The Final Station, which although has a very different gameplay loop, I was heavily reminded of it while playing this War of Mine. I've been Jordan from SwitchWatch, and I'll see you guys over there. Take care.